Welcome to Continuing the Conversation podcast, an expression of FOS. FOS is a community creating space for everyone to find hope, beauty, and purpose in the story of Jesus. Continuing the Conversation is one of the ways that we're trying to create space for an expanded dialogue and interactions based on the conversations we're having in FOS.
But one of the things that you said that actually just kind of resonated with me, you have those lines that kind of hit and you go, I need to write that down. You said the cup and bread tell us the world is generative. Every time it's broken, the cup and bread, more space is made for others to join. And that gave such a visceral image to why do we have these systems? Why do we celebrate? Why do we flip tables? Why do we need to exist as a Eucharistic community? And it's for that very moment that we can say that someone else is included, that as we break systems, as we look at traditions that no longer are life-giving for us, and say that we can draw newness out of them. We don't abandon them, but we can say we break them in order to create room for more humanity. That really captured what I hope we can become within the Eucharistic community that is FOS. That every time we break the bread, we realize that we break things that we hold as valuable to create space for people who've never got to experience the table.
Yeah, no, that's good, man. That's really good. Yeah, no, it's interesting. You write things and you put things down and you kind of see it one way. And then when somebody says it back to you, all of a sudden it sparks new ideas even about it. Right. And I think like in that way, like the phrase becomes a generative statement. And I feel like the breaking of the body of Christ, the breaking of the bread, which then is symbolic of the breaking of the body of Christ. It does that same thing. It's like when you do it yourself, it kind of speaks to us one way, you know what I mean? But when we do it in community and we see it reflected back to us, it all of a sudden new thoughts, new ideas, new possibilities are born in that moment. And so it's like, it was just interesting. Like, it was just like, as you said that, it's like, oh, okay. Like even my thought process is expanding as it's reflected back. And I think that's the beauty of seeing, like when we watch and observe, like we observe what Christ is doing and we reflect on that. But then when we actually participate in the breaking of the body of Christ, it becomes this generative thing that goes into I think it goes into the realm of possibilities versus into the realm of limitations, right? Like I think the way that we talked about this over the last couple of weeks, the way that we have talked about the idea of the Eucharist or communion, it's actually been this thing about limiting potential almost, right? Like it's like what have you done that has expanded past what is appropriate versus every time I do this, new possibilities, new worlds, new things are being created every time we do this. And it's like the Eucharist then becomes part of like God's co-creation, like our partnering with God in co-creation, you know what I mean? And I don't know, for me at least, it links like the Eucharist and like the creation narratives in this really cool, rapturous way.
Well, no, it's one of the things that I took out just because we're trying to delimit ourselves in our opening statements. But in 2:11, where it says this is the start or this is the first, it actually references back to John 1:1 and uses arche, which is, as we know, an echo of Genesis 1, the start of the creation narrative.
Yeah.
And throughout that first creation narrative, it keeps saying, it's good, it's good, it's good. And if that's the pronouncement from God, creation doesn't respond back. It's God saying creation's good. In this scene, it flips it though, because it uses the same notion of this is good and puts it into the head waiter's mouth. And then draws our attention back to John 1:1 when it says, and now this was the beginning of the signs of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so it's creation itself that witnesses God with us, the Eucharist moment, and says, this is good.
There's a statement like when you open, it was like, I think it was like part of your opening lines, right, where you talked about that this is not about Christianity over Judaism, right? Like this is not about like religious free, like I can't remember exactly the words you said, but like this is not about freedom over religiosity or something like that. But it's a different kind of narrative and a different kind of story. And I know I would love to just kind of even ask like just the question around that, like when you translate that into our contemporary moment and we see everything else that's happening around us, we see the ways that like Christian nationalism has played itself out in light of the current climate that we find ourselves in. We see all these different things happening, even with the current moments that are happening, like in Palestine, and like the notion of like Zionism and things like that. All these different things are happening, and our tendency is to want to say, well, like, which one is right, which one is this, which is whatever, like, right, who gets to win, who gets to win the argument in a sense. But I feel like when you make that statement, that this is not about Christianity over Judaism, this is not about like freedom over religiosity, or whatever the language was exactly that you used there, that you're actually offering something new. And I would love like to kind of hear what you would, how you would translate that into this current moment that we're seeing happening.
Mm. Um, well, yeah, as like this moment is kind of weighty because it comes from multiple narratives, multiple stories, and what you're mentioning in the notion of Zionism. Just in case whoever's hearing this hasn't read a lot of Christian history and church history, you have this movement of Zionism that kind of had a two-pronged effect. One, America is where it's centralized, said that we are the new Israel, and then we linked ourselves to ancient Israel. And so that created this military coup between powers. And so whatever was good for us, whatever was good for that land, was the ultimate good. But that comes out of our tradition. And I would say in this, in the same way that Jesus used ceremonial cleansing jars and pulled out the better wine for the party, that we have to see our traditions not as ends in and of themselves. That it's not legalism versus grace. It's not do whatever you want or only do what was good in the first century. It has to be a living, dynamic exchange between now to where we can say what systems, like when Jesus went into the temple, and that was the same idea of him drawing water out of the purification jars, and then him stepping foot into the temple and saying, no, this cannot be. Those could be by ancient laws of the temple. So he wasn't just saying, this isn't good because it was never good. He's saying this right now is destructive for people who are gathering. So when we look at things like the Palestinian-Israel conflict, is at least through a Christian lens. Let's always remember that. I'm looking through my tradition, through my experience. And so we're not making absolute statements. It's like, but looking at this lens, we cannot say as a Christian lens that it doesn't matter how much life is sacrificed as long as you have an Israel with secure national borders. I know that feels blasphemous to some of us, depending on the tradition you're raised in, but we cannot now elevate one nation and one life above the other. So when the Palestinians are being harmed, those are lives that are deeply valuable to God. And when Israel is harmed, also life deeply valuable to God, but we have to acknowledge that the reason this conflict exists is because of a certain way of reading our text, and if we're going to be honest, white guilt after World War II. So Western white powers colonized the Palestinian land and resettled it with those they felt guilty towards because there was a genocide towards Jewish people, to the point that we also erased all the other people that were being slaughtered. So the gypsies, the LGBTQ community, which would also be represented in the killing squads, we erased those because white guilt demanded one to be lifted up. And for that, I would say we need to own our tradition. We need to go to the tables and flip them for the ones that exist off of consuming others. And not to say this is right, this is wrong, this is legalism, this is grace, but to say there's a more generative, expansive way that we can draw new life, new wine out of old jars that has a room for everyone at the party, because kind of like the text says, we got 900 bottles. If you didn't bring anything, it's okay. We got you.
Yeah, man. It's interesting. Like when we think of like that act that Jesus did, like you said, 900 bottles of wine. I like to say 200 boxes of Costco box wine. Like there's more than enough, right? And I think that's the mentality that we have to have, is that there's more than enough. And I think that's the thing that Jesus calls us into when we watch this scene, is that this scene takes place, like the one at the wedding, but also the one where he flips tables, is that like you are limiting space, but there's more than enough space here. You are
Mhm.
limiting what could happen, and there's more than enough wine here. There's more than enough for everybody here. And I think that when we come to a place where we automatically expect that the world is going to be generative, we begin to lose these ideas of I have to border off my space. I have to border off my things, right? Because like honestly, I'm going to be if we're not generative, then it's going to be limited, and if it's limited or reductionistic in that sense, like it's all about what can I hold on to, right? And
Well,
and if oh, go ahead.
I would say if you're going with the economic models, if you have a generative excess space saying there's more than enough, then the flip is scarcity. And that says a lot for the way we imagine the world to come, the people to come, the what we say of God when we operate from a scarcity model. And scarcity model actually looks like a few things. Like if we say there's not enough space for other opinions and other people's, it happened to me recently because I disagreed with a gentleman, and this was just over social media stuff. It's those kind of things, and the person I disagreed with, I know. I was like, "Hey, what do you think of these points?" And I wasn't belittling or condescending. Then all of a sudden, a guy that he knows jumps in and takes a couple shots, and I was like, "Well, I'm not sure how you get there from here." And all of a sudden, because he doesn't think there's enough space and everything's about scarcity and defending the true, perfect one understanding, he goes, "I have 3 degrees. You don't want to go there with me." And I actually asked him because I looked up his page. I was like, "Oh, your 3 degrees are here. How does that affect this conversation?" And because he only sees limited space, there's not room for both. He said, "Your ignorance is beneath me. Good day, sir." And I was like, "Bro," I was like, "I don't know how that exchange happened because you just came in hard, flexed on me because you said there's not enough room for more." I was like, "I asked you a question that you could have brought in because generative says that what you add to me benefits me. What you bring to the table expands the table." Scarcity says, "I need to be the bouncer because I'm not sure how many people I can bring in or if you are going to affect the table in a way I don't like."
Yeah, yeah, man, that's good. I think like I don't know. I just for me personally, when like I'm just thinking about current and how like this current situation and not just the Palestinian Israeli stuff, but I mean like just everything that's been happening in this world around us, and just how much of it is based off of scarcity, right? Like that I mean, I don't like people are saying things about like for example, one of the things that somebody said to me recently about the vaccines is that like the reason why they don't want to get a vaccine is because the government is intentionally trying to poison half of the population so that they can depopulate the world by 50%. And it's just like, wow, okay. Um that that's interesting that you go there. Like what fear, it's a fear of scarcity that comes behind that. And it's just like, wow, okay. So like you want to make sure that you one of the people that land on the Isle of Plenty. I got it. I got it. um but it's just this that whole thing, like how many of the conflicts and all the things, the arguments that we're having